All right. Good morning, everybody. We are so excited to have Jennifer Martinez with Pico, California with us. If you don't know anything about Pico, California, they are the largest in California grassroots organization that is working on multiracial and faith-based community organizing. And so they do a lot of work to try to get people trained and organized and mobilized and motivated to channel the prophetic traditions of our faith to work on issues surrounding racial and economic justice and much more. And they, with a coalition of clergy and other faith leaders and tribal leaders, have put together a FaithVotes voter guide. And perhaps you've gotten a chance to read that. We put it in Friday's email. And it goes through all of the many propositions that are on the ballot this month or next month for California, many of them that have to do with economic and racial justice.
A few of them.
And so we wanted to invite Jennifer with us to go through those propositions that do deal with racial and economic justice, to talk to us how this faith guide came about, what these propositions are and why they are suggesting people vote on them in this way in order to uphold the faith tradition, and just answer questions that we might have about these particular issues. So Jennifer, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. I see a familiar face out there, David Mann. Hello. David and I go way back. So nice to see you. I'm pleased to meet the rest of you. So Pico, California has been, over the past 10 years, been very involved in getting people out to vote. And our primary focus has been on turning out infrequent and new voters who are often lower income and voters of color and not well represented in our state electorate. That has been changing, of course, over the past number of years, and we're part of a coalition to help make that change so that our electorate is more representative of our whole state. And part of what we have been doing as well has been participating actively in several ballot initiatives. And this year was a unique opportunity because a number of initiatives came up on the ballot that deal with racial justice issues. And this has been a really important year for racial justice in our country. And we thought it was a good opportunity to help inform voters about what is on the ballot that has to do with racial justice. So we looked at the ballot initiatives when they were announced or when they were finalized in August, and turned to a number of our member organizations. So we have 10 member organizations across the state that work in 26 counties throughout the state. So from the Central Valley to the Northern Oregon border to the southern border with Mexico, we work in many congregations and with many congregations across the state. And so with the help of those organizations, their clergy cohort tables, their boards, we proposed a set of initiatives for us to consider as part of our what we're calling our FaithVotes for Love and Justice voter guide. And I can share my screen, or which might be easiest for us to review the guide.
That would be great. Yeah, it's set up for you to share.
Okay, except for some reason, on my end, it's just showing a bunch of exclamation points that it looks like emergency, that it won't let me share. Any chance you have that guide on you? That you had? Have you downloaded it by any chance?
I do, yeah.
Would you be willing to share?
Take a moment and pull that up.
That would be great. It looks like there's some technical problem with Zoom on my end. But to finish the story, so actually we started with a set of about 25 faith leaders from across the state, from different traditions, different religious backgrounds, who came together to write originally a moral narrative. The idea behind this was, what is this moment calling for faith communities to be doing, spiritual and faith communities to be doing in this moment? What should our response be to the series of crises facing our communities? And so together they wrote what we called a moral narrative. And that moral narrative really then came to inform the propositions and the language. So most of the, okay, here we go. Okay, most of the language that you'll see here actually came from that moral narrative that was authored by a couple of dozen faith leaders in the state. And so this question of who matters, who belongs, and how shall we live really is kind of the anchoring questions behind that moral narrative. And then if you scroll down in the voter guide, you'll see that it kind of gives a background as to what the purpose of this guide is, how we hope people might use it. That includes using it to preach and teach if you are a member of clergy. It includes using it to do small group discussions. We know that there's a lot on our ballot these days. And we wanted to really make sure that every initiative was identified as having a central moral values that are part of what we can be discussing together as faith communities. If you go ahead and scroll the rest of the way or a little bit further down. So then we start with our recommendations. And actually, maybe I'll just stop there for a second and just, the context and the moral narrative, if there's any questions about that, and then before I dive into the propositions. All right. So it's going to be a lot of me talking. So apologies, because there are a lot of initiatives, and certainly there's a lot to discuss about each of them. So Prop 15 is the Schools and Communities First initiative. This is an initiative that would reform a part of the historic Prop 13 that has set property taxes at a certain rate in our state. This only affects commercial properties and would bring $12 billion back to schools and local communities by reassessing commercial and industrial properties every few years rather than just at the point of sale. We consider this to be a key racial justice initiative because most of the communities that have been most have been divested in as a result of not having these revenues come into our state over the past 40 years have been poor communities and communities of color whose schools and local services have been greatly impacted by the fact of not having resources through property taxes in the past 40 years. If you just go ahead and scroll down to the next one. Prop 16 is an initiative that would overturn the restrictions on affirmative action in California. Affirmative action is a way of creating advancing opportunities for historically marginalized communities. This includes African Americans, women, people with disabilities, and it would create more access for them in public colleges and other public institutions. Go ahead and scroll down. Props 17 and 18 have to do with voting and expanding the vote. So 17 would expand the vote to over 50,000 people who are currently on parole from a felony conviction, who do not have the right to vote as a result of their status as a person on parole. This would expand their ability to vote. Prop 18 would expand access to voting to people who will be turning 18 in the year of the election, but perhaps aren't quite 18 at the point of the primary. And so this would allow them to participate in voting in the primary so that they can then vote for the person or people that they want to at the point of the election. Prop 20 is actually the only no that are in our recommendations or that came out of the clergy recommending. I'm seeing a chat here. Sure, I'll get to that, and maybe I'll add that in as I talk. The question is, can I add who was part of these propositions? That's a really excellent question because it does in part inform how we made some choices about where we would support this. This is a proposition, the Yes on 20 proposition is a proposition that was put forth by the sheriff's associations and other law enforcement associations It would attempt to reform, or rather overturn, criminal justice reforms that have been passed in California over the past handful of years. Many of the organizations, faith communities that Pico works with were part of passing those reforms in the first place. And so we are saying no to this proposition because it would basically accelerate the carceral state in our that we have been trying to reform and diminish. Go to the next one. Yes on 21 is an initiative that would allow local governments to expand rent control. It does not actually create rent control in the state, but right now there are state restrictions on rent control. This initiative was put forward by an organization called the AIDS Health Foundation based in Los Angeles. They focus on supporting people with HIV and AIDS, and in terms of securing housing and other access to services. It is supported by a broad reach of organizations, local grassroots organizations across the state who've been working on issues of affordable housing, and particularly people who are at risk of being homeless. So we have been part of that as Pico, California for the past 5 years, addressing the housing crisis in our state, and are recommending a yes vote for this. Yes on 25 is a bit of a confusing initiative. It is an initiative that has been put forth by the cash bail industry. And I'm not entirely clear about the logic here, but in 2018, there was a bill that essentially, well, it didn't completely eliminate, but radically reform the cash bail system by not requiring cash bail for many, many kinds of not convictions, but when someone is waiting for trial. Sorry, the word escapes me. Charges, thank you very much for charges. And it's a bit of a challenging initiative. There's a real split in the social justice, racial justice community about this initiative. Many feel that it doesn't go far enough in terms of reforming the bail system. It allows judges a level of discretion that people do not feel good about, given issues of implicit bias and other sort of system dynamics. Pico, California was very involved in this bill in 2018. We were also very concerned that it didn't go far enough. And yet in this instance, we suggest that we say yes to maintaining the bill as it stands, while recognizing that we need to continue doing further work. It does, we want to make sure that cash bail isn't being used in a way that criminalizes poor people, which is currently, or has been, how it's been used. And so we say yes to ending the cash bail system in California. That's the total as of right now. We know that there are a number of other initiatives that are on the ballot that some might also be considered racial justice or social justice issues. Proposition 22, which has to do with folks who are part of the digital economy like Uber and Lyft, and whether or not they should be classified as employees or contractors. You know, that's a hotly debated issue. We also know there's a Proposition 24, which has really, quite frankly, recently come to our attention as a racial justice issue in terms of collecting personal information, and folks have argued that this is particularly concerning for immigrants. We were not able to reach conclusions on those ballot initiatives, and so we're not able to recommend a yes or no on them as a network of organizations, and so we did not include them in our voter guide. Certainly there's more information to be gathered about those ones as well. I agree with Peggy. There's a lot of information online that you should look at who's pro and against, and there's definitely more that can be learned about each of these propositions. That's really important. So that is the extended voter guide. It's intended really, we hope, to be used in faith communities. Particularly the yellow sections here are really the moral positioning that clergy and faith leaders have organized themselves and their thinking around these issues, and we hope will be used as points of discussion. And really, I think one of the key features here is that we are particularly interested in continuing to encourage the conversation about racial justice, encourage the conversation about what it means in particular for Black communities, and how we are centering the voices of those who have been most marginalized and affected by many of our unjust systems in the state. And I'm happy to take more questions or leave you to your morning, depending on how you'd like to go.
Thank you so much for walking us through this guide and some of the reasoning behind how you put it together. I bet we have some questions on here as people are thinking about these issues. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. You can use the little blue hand raising icon, or in your video, you can raise your hand. Are there any questions that you have for Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Tomas Morales. Can you talk a little bit about 16? I absolutely agree with the recommendation because I think it's confusing because Prop 209 was very impacted communities of color, particularly in small businesses and admissions to the state universities. Can you talk a little bit about why are you supporting a yes on Prop 209? I mean, I'm sorry, a yes on Prop 16 to rescind 209.
Right, yeah. Well, for very much so many of the reasons that you talked about, the conversations that our congregations and clergy have had have been, what are the ways in which we can address the historic exclusions and marginalization of communities of color, and particularly African-American communities. And certainly this is one of the ways. This was brought together by a group of organizations that have been working on this issue for about 20 years. They were successful in getting it passed through the legislature. The legislature at the end of the day voted to put it on the ballot. And it's, many years in coming. We're one of the only states in the country that does not have some kind of affirmative action, which we know has a complicated history, but essentially is, how do we make sure that people who have been historically marginalized, who maybe are coming from under-resourced school districts and whatnot, are able to access opportunities in the same ways that others have been able to historically. So for many of the reasons you said.
Yeah, let me also just say that I'm really proud that the California State University presidents and board of trustees have support yes on 16 as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jennifer?
This is Mel Boynton. I appreciate your presentation, Jennifer. This is excellent this morning. I was hoping you would give me more guidance on 22, but I understand it's very complicated and you guys didn't take a position on it. I just wanted to comment that on Prop 15, I'm an old economist, and the inequality of our society, which is very extreme in the country and in California, is exacerbated by our underfunding of public education. And when Prop 13 in the old days was passed, about 80% of property tax was paid by commercial and 20% by residential. That has completely flipped now. Now it's 80% is paid by residential, the people that thought they were going to get protected by Prop 13, and 20% is owned by corporate commercial real estate, and they're still paying taxes at their original rate when Prop 13 was passed. So it's really very much an inequality issue, and a time to let very wealthy corporations who are awash in cash pay a little fairer share of the property tax burden. I was told by a member of the family of a board member locally that Claremont Public Schools would receive approximately $3 million more a year if Prop 13 passes. And I'm told that the statewide number is in many billions of dollars. So I think that's one that I'm very passionate about. Would you give us a little bit more of your thinking on 15? Do you think it's as important as I do?
I am 100% with you, Mel. It is it's something that I personally and we organizationally have been working on for over 5 years. It was many years of discernment and research and discussion and coalition building, and really led by organizations that recognize how severe the impacts have been on local communities in terms of public schools, local services. My first introduction to Prop 13 was trying to get a health clinic to stay open for a poor community in the Bay Area, not knowing that part of the reason we couldn't keep the health clinic open was because our community didn't have the kind of resources it needed. And this is certainly part of that solution. I think one of the key things here to just underscore what you said is that in the research and in the analysis of the properties, it's only about 10% of the largest commercial properties that would be paying a vast majority of this $12 billion. They're the ones reaping the most benefit from the 40-year legacy of Prop 13. This does not have anything to do with homeowners. It protects small businesses. It actually gives a bit of a tax relief to small businesses. And there was recently a report out that an independent report that just came out and affirmed that small businesses would not be affected. Happy to share that with you all, because I know that's one big concern we all have in the moment of COVID and the ways our small businesses are being affected. So yeah, this is an incredibly important one, and it could really, because it's not a one-time tax, it's an ongoing closing of a loophole, would be really important for our communities for the long term.
I also understand it doesn't take effect immediately, it phases in. So people that are worried about impact during COVID, this actually is going to come into effect, I think, over 3 years, as I recall.
That's right. Yes, you're very well informed. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have an additional comment, I guess. I definitely feel that Prop 13 needs to be re-examined, even though myself and many of my friends have benefited from it and will as homeowners and family. So I'm interested in your comment that small businesses will not be impacted, because that would be my concern. Many commercial real estate leases are triple net, which means the cost of property taxes are included in the responsibility of the tenant, which can be a small business owner. And so my concern is that this cost will just be passed on to the tenants and have those unintended consequences. So you say you've seen research that says it's not going to have an impact. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to email that after I get off this call so that it can be shared with you all. What the report says, and which is probably a little bit intuitive if to think about it, is that the triple net lease, that rents are set at the rate of the market, not necessarily having much to do with the taxes. So yes, taxes are technically included in a triple net lease, but rents will be set at what the market can bear. So that may, in many cases, particularly for long-standing commercial property owners, taxes are very, very low, and yet the rents in their that they be leasing are very, very high. having very little to do with the relationship between the rate of tax and the actual rent or lease being charged. And then there's more details in it. The proposition doesn't raise or close the loophole for those who have a value of $3 million or less on their property. It only starts at $3 million. So if a property goes a little bit above that, it only starts assessing that portion above 3 million. And it then gives a personal property tax break to small businesses as well in the amount of $500,000, which is quite significant for small businesses. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, tax break for small businesses that they've gotten in a long time. So there's a lot of different protections built into the proposition already. And then in addition to that, the way that rents and leases are set, it actually really offsets that argument almost completely according to this report. I'd be happy to share it because they're very smart economists who wrote this report, who are much more expert than I am and can probably answer some nuances to what you might be thinking about.
David, you have your hand up?
Yeah. Greetings, Jennifer. It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you. I wanted to stay on Proposition 15 for a couple more minutes and ask about the campaign and what it's, I don't know if this is an appropriate, what you can say, but I'd like to know what Pico, California is doing, the faith communities are doing within the campaign, and what the current prospects and funding is that you're in touch with about its passing. I think it's so important.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David. So Pico, California is one of the 6 core organizations leading the campaign, so I can say quite a lot about it. Some of it is trade secret, though, so I can't say everything. We are very active in a number of fronts. One is in obviously communicating to congregations what we believe is important about this issue. The second is we are talking to voters across the state. We're working with a coalition of partners that's personally reaching 1.4 million voters, particularly voters who are less, maybe get less information, Spanish-speaking voters, lower income voters, younger voters. And so we're working to engage them around this issue. We're also working to engage them around the issue of Prop 20 and No on 20. So we have phone banks every Monday night. We have local phone banks, all virtual, so no getting in the same room together, but virtual phone banks every Monday night. And then there's also other opportunities to get involved with the campaign. The campaign runs phone banks almost every night of the week. In terms of money, this is going to be a very expensive initiative. Funny enough, I thought it was going to be the most expensive initiative this year, but turns out Prop 22 is the most expensive initiative this year. And I could say a little more about Prop 22. I just can't tell you what our organization, I can say more about the background of it and who's on what side, but I can't tell you what our organization, how our organization stands. But yeah, Prop 15 is a hotly contested issue. Some of the largest corporate interests in the state have put money up against it. And then a bunch of grassroots organizations, philanthropic interests, have been supporting its passage. So we've been successful in raising almost $50 million in support of the proposition, which is a little mind-boggling. But considering it will bring back $12 billion, it's a drop in the bucket for what its overall value will be.
Is it a simple majority?
It's a simple majority. Polling currently puts the yes vote at 51% and the no vote at 40%, with a bunch of folks undecided. And those are the folks that tend to be less typically reached out through traditional campaigns. And so we're trying to reach them.
Thank you.
Tomas, you have your hand up?
Yes, wondering if you have any thoughts on Prop 23.
I don't, because I don't even remember what Prop 23 is. So I would invite you to say a little bit about what it is, so that others might know.
Dialysis.
Oh yeah, I don't know much about it. If it's an interest of other folks, I would love to hear what you all know about it, but I don't know much.
Go ahead, Gene.
It's the for-profit dialysis industry and the Service Employees International Union have been battling each other for many years. This is a continuation of the battle. It is a very similar piece of legislation to one that passed quite a long time ago. The LA Times recommends a no vote. The county Democrats, the county AFL, the state AFL-CIO, the Church Council, California Church Impact Council recommend a yes vote, and so do I. But there's plenty of shame on both sides. It's a nasty, ugly dispute that's gone on for years. The main thing it would do would be to require additional reporting and the presence of a doctor at all times on the for-profit commercial dialysis clinics. They say it will do them incredible damage, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars to say so. But I wish it weren't on the ballot. I plan to vote yes.
Thanks, Gene. It was
But I
been on the
think
ballot a couple of times now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Morally, everyone's in the wrong.
Mm.
I have a question. So just everyone, so you know, this Faith Votes guide is built on the premise that as people of faith, we should be working on issues of economic, to have some analysis of why these issues do impact the work we're trying to do as faith communities on these issues. Of course, the church is not going to demand that you vote on an issue in any specific way. As people of free conscience, you can always vote however you want to. I'm curious though, Jennifer, are you as Pico, California, facing any opposition on how you want people to vote on these propositions from what we might characterize as conservative Christian communities? Are there other religious communities advocating opposite perspectives on any of these propositions?
You know, not as a, we haven't encountered that as a whole, that a community as a whole has come out in opposition in a particular way. Certainly individuals though. I'm going to be on a panel on Tuesday night about Prop 15 with some of our Jewish communities, and they have people from inside of the synagogues, you know, on either side of the panel. So, you know, debating yes and no. So certainly there are live conversations internal to communities that are, you know, where the people have a different point of view. Probably the ones that are most contentious in that arena are probably Prop 15, Prop 21. Those are the ones that seem to be most split, the economic focused ones. I've encountered less dispute internal to communities around the voting propositions and around the criminal justice reforms. But that maybe speaks to overall like how people are moving in California around criminal justice reform and other sorts of voting rights. So yeah, but no community that said, you know, we can't discuss this in our communities because we're unopposed.
And all of these propositions are very important. Is there one or even more than one that you are worried will not pass the way you want it to, and the people on this call should start talking about that proposition with everyone they know to drum up support?
Well, you heard some of it here. 15 is a very is going to be very tough. We're going to squeak by. If that passes, it will be because of the conversations we've had with individuals in our communities and our networks to really dig into what this is really about and the long history here. The other proposition that really unfortunately looks like it's not doing well is Proposition 16, the affirmative action. According to recent state polls, it was polling very low. I'm not entirely sure why that would be. I've been asking folks, it's been a long time since we've had this conversation in California. There's certain conversations going on in the country about affirmative action, and that might be partly what's influencing it here. It didn't have very long to get off the ground. It was just put on the ballot by the legislature in July. So it's a very short turnaround.
That is a very politically charged phrase for some people, affirmative action. Would you be able to share with us some talking points about how you explain to communities what exactly that term means and why this proposition is important?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's one of the, with little time to actually turn around a campaign, the phrase didn't really get well tested and rethought. I think here we're really talking about how do we create opportunities for people who've been historically excluded, marginalized, and left in a very, in our state where there is vast inequalities, and oftentimes those inequalities are racialized. And so that's how I try to characterize it. I would be curious if others have other ways of thinking about it as well. Those of you who've thought about this issue.
Go ahead, Peggy, and then Mel, but Peggy, you're muted.
Sorry. I was involved in many searches at Cal Poly Pomona University, and we had affirmative action guidelines, and then they went away and so on. But really, people seem to misconstrue it to mean that it requires that you hire someone based on their protected status or whatever, rather than on qualifications. And really what affirmative action means is simply making sure that the pool of people that you are choosing from is as diverse as possible, and looking at your requirements. Are they, if you require for a dean search that a person be a dean for 5 years, well, how many people of color might that include, or women? And is that really necessary to be a good dean? Maybe they've had other kind of experience. So it's really examining how you go about it and not making, just assumptions about, well, this is the way we'll find the best people. This is where we advertise and so on. So, and then when the process happens, you look for the best qualified person. So for me, it's been a very clear distinction as opposed to what many people say.
Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, I think the conversation about affirmative action nationally has had a couple of points against affirmative action, and that is that poverty exists across all racial and cultural backgrounds, and that we should be seeking equal opportunity based on economic status, not racial or cultural background. I think that argument, while it has some merit, it ignores or minimizes the reality of systematic racism in our culture and our country. So there's just a lot of sometimes unconscious, sometimes conscious racial discrimination that occurs, cultural discrimination, sexual discrimination. And I think while affirmative action gets batted around, opportunity for every person, regardless of their gender or their race or their cultural background, is a worthy matter. And so we should be supporting Prop 16. But there has been this big discussion going, and if this campaign is not well organized and thought through, it probably will fail.
Thanks, Mel. Jean, you want to comment on that, and then we can go to Tomas as a question again. Go ahead and unmute.
Go to Tomas first, because I was changing to respond to your question on another issue.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Jean. Go ahead, Tomas.
Thank you. So, Prop 16, voting yes on Prop 16 really begins to dismantle the caste system that is so prevalent in the United States, where simply white privilege, to be frank with you. And you're right, affirmative action has this, just people don't understand what affirmative action is all about. I think Peggy's right on point, and so is Mel. And I think that it really provides an opportunity. For example, small businesses that are owned by people of color do not have the same opportunities to compete for state contracts that other businesses that are not owned by women and people of color have. So it's not just admissions into higher education, but it's really addressing the inequities that we find in America and that we find in California.
Thank you. Yeah, Tomas is president at Cal State San Bernardino, so another great perspective from someone in the educational sector on its wide-reaching implications. Gene, do you want to go ahead?
You asked the question of whether some of the Pico recommended positions are in jeopardy because of the intensity of the campaign against them. So I wanted to highlight the number 25, the cash bail being replaced with risk assessment. This is, I wholeheartedly support Pico's position. The for-profit bail, commercial bail industry is spending so many millions and millions and millions of dollars on this issue that it's one that's in jeopardy. Were it to pass, it would allow people who have been charged with a crime to be left outside the detention while awaiting trial, depending on an assessment of their likelihood of failing to appear or being a threat to public safety, rather than whether they got money or not. And it's a major social justice issue from my point of view, but there will be a lot of opposition. I also, before this event is over, I hope very much that you'll talk about Proposition J at the count for those of us who are in LA County. Given the criteria that Pico is using, that's a very, very important issue. And I was wondering, Jennifer, if you wanted to speak to it or have one of us do it. I know it's not a Pico statewide issue.
But our local affiliate, LA Voice in Los Angeles County, is supporting. Or are you talking about in San Bernardino County or LA County? Are you guys
I'm talking about LA County, Proposition J, reimagine LA budgeting, the reallocation of money now going into law enforcement for other purposes like drug addiction counseling, mental health counseling, affordable housing options, community development in ways that correct unnecessary incarceration with healthy communities. It's a very, very important issue. It really fulfills the themes of Black Lives Matter and of, quote, defund the police, unquote. It doesn't defund. It helps to reallocate to where the money will do the most good for safety and for justice. That's Proposition J.
Thanks, Gene. Do you have anything more to add to that, Jennifer?
No, Gene said it great.
That was good. Okay.
Yeah, our local affiliate is working on it. They've included it in all of their voter outreach. Agree. It's really kind of creating the first, at least in California, experiment, if you will, or trial of this idea of, can we reimagine what community safety looks like? And I think that's it. It's an exceptional step in that direction.
Is it looking like it will pass, or is it?
It'll be tight. LA Times supports it, and of course, the Democratic Party supports it. League of Women Voters supports it. The opposite is the case in the labor movement, because the law enforcement labor unions, the sheriffs, the police, the deputy DAs are fighting it very, very, very hard. And even that's a bird in the hand situation, because it won't kill jobs, it will create jobs, but the jobs that it will create in mental health, in addiction counseling and community development, those jobs don't exist yet. So it's a bird in the hand, a cop job or a jailer job, which might be not replaced in the future at some time, against wonderful new jobs that would strengthen the community, but nobody's in those jobs yet, so that they're not being, that's why there's fierce opposition from deputy sheriffs and their cohorts.
A question in the chat for you, Jennifer. What was the name of the affiliated organization? It was Voice LA?
LA Voice.
LA Voice.
Yeah. LAvoice.org.
Could you give the San Bernardino affiliate too?
Sure. Inland Congregations United for Change, ICUC. I believe it's ICUC.org as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we are right on the LA San Bernardino border, so we've got folks in both
I
counties.
just messaged privately. Write that again.
You know, everyone, we've been reading a lot of books in our racial justice and cultural awareness book group, New Jim Crow, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Crossing the Lynching Tree, and we talk about putting these theoretical discussions into practice. And this is one way that we can do that. Things like ending cash bail, what Gene was talking about with the LA Measure J. These are active ways to put what we believe are faith-motivated efforts to curtail systemic racism into action. So this is why it's really important to have these discussions, to be informed. Thank you to everyone who's added so much to the discussion. Mel, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just one last comment. Jean Boutelier is modest enough to not mention it, but there's a wonderful voter guide that the Pilgrim Place residents have put together that also summarizes other people's recommendations as well as their committee's recommendation. And I would ask Jean, who's on that committee and a driver of it, to share that, and maybe the people that want to follow up can get a look at that through you, Jacob, possibly.
Yeah, we're going to share Gene and the Pilgrim Place guy. We're going to ask Gene if he's willing. We're sending some emails now to have him speak too, just to give another opportunity for people to delve into these issues and dialogue further and learn a little bit more about some of the local measures as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. All right, any other questions this morning?
Should we leave?
All right. Jennifer, we are just really grateful for your time. Thank you for coming online with us and sharing. Thank you for your excellent work. It sounds like you've been doing this for many years and a lot of effort being put into this. So we hope that come November 3rd, that some of these propositions help our communities. So thank you for your work. And we see some digital applause on there.
Thanks,
We'll put
Al.
this recording up by the end of the day tomorrow. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I just appreciate your work too, and getting the word out and helping others make sense of the ballot. It can be hard in California, but I know we can do it.
Thank you. This guide is in Friday's church email. If you're not on the church email, reach out to us, jacob@claremontucc.org, and we can get that to you. If you want to share this recording with anyone, we'll have it up on the church YouTube channel by tomorrow afternoon. So thank you, everyone. See you in worship in a few minutes.